So, you know what upsets me? Outside of Brazil, no one ever talks about what a teenage Ronaldinho was like. People act like he just showed up one day as a 24-year-old ready to take the Ballon d'Or when, really, at that point, he had 6 seasons under his belt with 287 appearances for club and country. And I mean, you know the guy. Do you really think he was any different back then? Read any old Brazilian newspaper and they'll tell you he was already the most entertaining player in the world. The world just didn't know it. You see, the only story from back in his time in Brazil that ever really hit the mainstream is that at 13 years old, he made it to the newspapers after scoring 23 goals in a single match. But that was nothing. Even Ronaldinho has admitted that those kids were terrible. They were just representing their school. They had never even been in a real academy. What really made him a local celebrity from the time he was 7 years old was that his brother, Assis, was a Wonderkid himself. Back then, at just 17 years of age, he was already scoring in a final of the Brazilian Cup to take Grémio to the first title in their history. He was lining up for a transfer to the Serie A. He had Scolari claiming he was the biggest talent in Brazil. But regardless of any of that, whenever the press would talk to their father, he'd always say, Assis is very good, but wait for our little guy, he's the real star in the family. Almost as if he was already preparing the world for a future that he unfortunately would not be part of. That same year, after arriving home from futsal practice, Ronaldinho was greeted with the kind of words no kid is ever prepared to hear. There was an accident. Daddy is gone. His father had suffered a heart attack, fallen into the pool, and drowned. Still, no matter how traumatizing that was, over the years there was one piece of advice that was always the first to pop into Ronaldinho's head every time he remembered him. Whenever you play football, play beautifully. His dad was a football fanatic. I mean, everyone in the family was, but that man, he took an extra job in his free time parking cars at Grémio Stadium just so he could be closer to the club. You see, with a family coming from Porto Alegre, right by the Brazilian border, they were closer to Uruguay than they were to Rio. For one of them to make it to the top of Brazilian football was much more far-fetched than it would be for any of the players that would eventually line up alongside him. So, 2 years later, once all of his brother's dreams slowly started to fade, following a devastating injury, to honor his dad's advice was to honor his memory. In Ronaldinho's own words, every time I had the ball at my feet, it felt like he was standing by my side. It was no longer just a dream, it all became a mission. So, over the next few years, no matter how many academy coaches told him he was just a street footballer, that playing like that, he'd never become a proper player, he kept true to his father's philosophy, and by the time he turned 16, he was already donning that bright yellow shirt, assisting both of Brazil's goals in their final against Argentina to become an under-17 South American champion and to make his way to the Youth World Cup, where after 2 more assists in yet another final, Ronaldinho would be lifting the trophy alongside his teammates right in front of the pyramids of Egypt. It just doesn't get more iconic than that. At this point, Grémio had no alternative but to put him in the first team. I mean, from his first training session with them, all the players were gossiping about him in the locker room, claiming that his family was right, that this one was a master of the ball, and so, refusing to go easy on him, they put him straight into the starting 11 for a Copa Libertadores match against Vasco, put him in charge of all set pieces, and he proved he was ready right then and there, first hitting the crossbar with a free kick, and then putting in the corner that led to their winning goal. Regardless, even if a month later Ronaldinho would already be getting his first goal with a screamer against Guadalajara, over that first season he would struggle to get much playing time, falling out of favor with manager Celso Roth, who was frustrated by how often the federation would call him up to represent the youth national teams. But no matter what, the next year, despite missing out on the opening 8 matches of the Gaúcho Championship to yet again join Brazil for the Under-20 World Cup, he'd come back after collecting the bronze medal, get introduced into the team, and go absolutely nuts, scoring 9 goals in his first 10 matches at the Gaúcho Championship, then watching his team lose the quarterfinals first leg in his absence, coming in for the second, and scoring twice to put them through, as the fans who had quickly embraced him as their new star player began mocking the constant comparisons to the phenomenon himself by chanting that he was not the little Ronaldo, but the better Ronaldo. and by the semi-finals, he'd already be scoring both home and away to put Grémio in the final against their direct rivals Internacional, which would simply become the match where Ronaldinho announced to the entire country that he was the next in line, that despite his age, he was not to be taken lightly. Going into the finals first leg, there was one international player Ronaldinho was keeping an eye on, none other than Dunga, the captain of the Brazilian national team who took the 1994 World Cup title. But as the local newspapers were already labeling this game as a matchup between old and new, outside of their state, with Grémio having gone 8 matches without beating Internacional, no one thought a kid could ever stand a chance against Dunga. And after Grémio took a first leg defeat, as a frustrated Ronaldinho came off the pitch complaining that his free kick had gone in, most assumed they were right to doubt him. But an hour into that second leg, he kissed the ball, set it down for another free kick, and curled it straight into the top corner, forcing it all into a third match tiebreaker. Look, I genuinely think Dunga could have had a shot at that final game had he not made one massive mistake. As he came off of the second leg, angry that the kid had literally stepped on him, he claimed that this Ronaldinho is a poorly mannered player. In the decisive match, he'll get what he deserves. And that made it personal. The kid had grown up collecting Panini stickers with Dunga's face on him, and now he was spending the whole week watching his idol drag him on live TV. So, upset, he showed his teammates a specific dribble in training and told them, if I catch Dunga one-on-one, I'm gonna pull this trick on him, going as far as betting them dinner that he'd really do it. So, even once he made it past 4 defenders to score the goal that left Grémio with one hand on the trophy and Ronaldinho himself at the top of the goal-scoring charts, that wasn't enough. Minutes later, like the Wild Wild West, he found himself one-on-one with Dunga and broke his ankles with a dribble so embarrassing, even his own mom said she didn't raise him to be out and about humiliating people like that. And yet, to make it all worse, then he'd pull a sombrero on him, securing the trophy as the fans ran into the pitch to thank him, and making sure to tell the press that I could have done much worse. He actually got off easy. I had several dribbles reserved just for him. They all had his name on them. After that performance, Ronaldinho with Vanderlei Luxemburgo beating himself up over the fact he'd locked in his Copa America call-up without putting his name on it, but thankfully for him, Edilson pretty much incited a riot by showboating in the middle of a match, so Vanderlei used that as justification to cross his name off the list and bring Ronaldinho instead, even though, at that point, there were only 9 days left until the start of the tournament. The whole thing was so sudden that Ronaldinho was made aware of his call-up while he was still celebrating the Gaúcho Championship win live on TV, at first generally insisting that they had to be pranking him, though somehow 5 days later he was already being brought into a friendly against Venezuela for his national team debut, and I kid you not, with his first ever touch he lifted the ball over the defender, made it past another, and smacked in the half volley for his first ever goal. And though in that Copa America he'd still play a minor role as Rivaldo and Ronaldo led them to the title, just 10 more days after that final, the Confederation Cup began, and there he blew any expectations out of the water. In the first game, he scored 1 and assisted 2 to demolish Germany 4-0. In the second, he got their only goal against the United States. To close out the group, he got another against New Zealand, and in the semis, just wow. 11 minutes in, he had scored his first. Before the first half closed, he put in a perfect cross for Alex. In the second, he started off things by assisting another, then scored this sort of acrobatic goal, got 1 more assist as the game was about to go into injury time, and once there, the cherry on the cake, he pulled off maybe the goal of the tournament. 3 goals and 3 assists in an 8-2 semi-final win, a little more than a month after his national team debut. Never had a kid deserve to lift a trophy more than he did in that tournament, but unfortunately for him, neither the golden ball nor the golden boot were enough to ease his pain, as in the final, even after adding 2 more assists to his tally, they would lose regardless. Still, after starting the next season with another absurd campaign at the Gaúcho Championship, finishing just 2 goals of being the top scorer, despite missing out on a ton of matches while he was out carrying the Brazilian under-23s, with 9 goals and 4 assists in just 7 matches at the pre-Olympic tournament, suddenly Suddenly, the European clubs were all starting to make their moves. There were scouts from Barcelona, Milan and Real. PSV had made it public they intended to make him the heir to Romario and Ronaldo. Leeds United allegedly put down a €30 million offer, but Grémio refused to budge, instead offering Ronaldinho the chance to triple his salary by signing a contract renewal, which was precisely when the situation blew up. Ronaldinho rejected the renewal, which, alongside the fact that a law that allowed players to negotiate free transfers once they were in the final months of their contract was about to be put in place, meant that, very clearly, he and his brother, who was now his agent, were plotting an exit. So much so that Grêmio's board made a request straight to the president of Brazil to delay the approval of the new law. Regardless, no matter how scared they were, even after a massively disappointing Olympic campaign where Brazil was knocked out by a 9-man Cameroon in extra time, despite Ronaldinho having come clutch with a last-minute goal, once he made it back to Grémio to play the Brazilian Championship again, he popped off. 8 goals in the first stage, and once in the knockouts, he scored their only goal in the last 16 first leg with a stunning free kick, and then saved them in the second, assisting the away goal to put them in the quarters, where then he scored all 3 of their goals, a free kick, then some standard Ronaldinho magic, and finally a penalty that he won after putting his teammate through with an incredible backheel touch. Suddenly, they were only 1 step away from the final, but before Ronaldinho could even get a hold of the next match, they were behind 2-0. He tried to claw their way back, going on an incredible run to score one of the goals of the season and then putting in another free kick. But in the end, Grémio ended up settling for defeat regardless, thanks to a second leg humiliation. After that, they had the newspapers labeling them as Ronaldinho Football Club, as everyone could see that they would be nothing without him, which would become a much more serious problem when just a few weeks later, after Ronaldinho narrowly missed out on the Player of the Year award to Romario, his contract reached its final 3 months, and PSG announced out of nowhere that they were in negotiations with him, with a player who had once claimed that, for Grémio, he would play for free. Suddenly, everyone in Porto Alegre lost their minds. The club, delusionally still believing they had a say in it, even put up a banner in front of their stadium that read, "We don't sell star players, please do not insist." But really, before they knew it, he was already giving interviews in front of the Eiffel Tower, leaving it all behind and choosing to wait around in Paris for 6 months, rather than staying and dealing with the hate, which, ironically, only made it worse, as even after a whole lawsuit, Grémio ended up getting only $7 million for his signing, with Ronaldinho literally being booed out of a nightclub the next time he stepped foot in town. No matter what, once in Paris, the hype was gigantic. He had newspapers calling him the most promising footballer on the planet. The fans were all raving that with Okocha, Anelka and Ronaldinho up front, they'd finally get back to the top of French football. But even if, at first, that didn't happen, with their manager Luis Fernandes refusing to rush Ronaldinho into the starting 11, he did eventually admit that those first months were magical. Everything he'd try, he'd get right. So once Anelka left in the middle of the season, precisely at the same time that Okocha went out injured, Fernandes had no choice but to put Ronaldinho in the driver's seat, and right as the new year started, he exploded onto the scene. In the first match, he scored a penalty versus Monaco. Then, he opened the next with an incredible finish through the narrowest of gaps, only to make that seem completely unremarkable after running past the whole team for his second, which ended up being named the goal of the season. Still, the following game, he scored a free kick, then the next a penalty, and then another free kick against Lorient, as well as 2 beautiful assists to demolish them 5-0, then 1 more versus Bordeaux, and finally, to close out his streak, maybe his best performance of the bunch, making it past the entire Trois squad twice to score 2 absolute masterpieces, as well as 2 more incredible assists, one there and another the following match, making it 11 goal contributions in 10 league games that finally brought PSG into the top 4 and into the UEFA Cup spots, earning him enough credibility that once the World Cup started, Scolari was left with no option but to start him in every game. Right from the get-go, he was dribbling circles around any defender who thought he could get the ball off him. By the second game, he was already getting his first goal and assisting Rivaldo, which he did again in the round of 16. And by the quarters, if there was any doubt in anyone's mind that he could hang with the all-time greats that were lining up beside him, once Brazil went into the second half down 1-0 to England for what seemed like the 100th time that year, he grabbed the ball and made it past their entire team before sliding it off to assist Rivaldo for the 3rd consecutive game, and just 5 minutes later, before the fans even had time to calm down, he scored such an unbelievable free kick that he had every commentator in utter shock, refusing to believe he had even done it on purpose, and though the reporters would not be able to ask him themselves, as minutes later he'd strangely get sent off and brought in for an anti-doping test. Eventually, he would break it down in an interview claiming that, while watching the footage of their games, I noticed that keeper liked to come off his line, so I went for it. And 7 days later, after sitting out their semi-final versus Turkey, he came in for the most important game of his life, and honestly, this is one of those things that will be forgotten by history, but it was incredible that day. Twice he left Ronaldo one-on-one with Khan, another one of his passes that his teammate hit the bar, but as much as he wasn't quite able to get his name on the headlines, he was now a world champion, and by the end of the year, he'd be 12th on the Ballon d'Or rankings, no matter how often his own manager at PSG would complain about him, saying he was more interested in the Parisian nightlife than football, or that Ronaldinho only shows up for the big matches, because, in reality, Fernandes was the one who was notoriously hard to please. When actually looking back at his performances, it's impossible not to see that Ronaldinho was incredible. Right from October, he got things going with a classist finish against Troyes. The next game, he gave them their first win over rivals Marseille in 2 years, scoring twice, one of them being a free kick from a seemingly impossible angle. Then came an assist in each of the 2 games that followed before going on a run with a goal against Monaco and further assist against Lyon, Bordeaux and Lille, bringing it all up a notch by scoring what was quite literally the goal of the season against Drogba's Jangan, and then going into an away match against Marseille, intercepting the ball, as usual running the whole length of the pitch in order to score, and somehow, before the end of the match, doing it all again, damn near mocking the keeper before going around him, only for his teammate to pretty much steal his goal, as he led PSG to their first win at the Stade Vélodrome after 14 years and completed a streak of 14 goal contributions in 14 league matches, still, somehow, taking it all a step further once again by coming up against Bordeaux in the French Cup semi-final. And man, I'm almost tired of saying it, he just did what he does best, going past everyone, scoring and then killing off the game with a ridiculous chip from outside the box. Sadly, he would end up losing the final, somehow coming out trophyless regardless, but it really didn't matter, because meanwhile in Spain, Joan Laporta had won the elections at Barcelona, and having promised the fans he'd bring Beckham to the club, he found himself with his back against the wall the moment Real beat him to the signing. But thankfully for him, it was right there that one of his right-hand men, Sandro Rosell, suggested the signing of Ronaldinho as an alternative, leading Barcelona to come in with a €35 million offer to snatch him right out of the hands of Sir Alex Ferguson when he was just 48 hours away from signing with United. And look, the day he signed, they had Real Madrid executives mocking Barcelona, claiming there was no point in buying him since he's so ugly he'd sink you as a brand. Pundits on TV were agreeing, claiming Laporta had betrayed the fans, that this signing was a mere cop-out. But well, a year and a half later, Ronaldinho was the new FIFA World Player of the Year, and when it comes to that brand recognition, he was on the cover of FIFA. He was the most loved player on the planet.